Why don't we get started? This is the press conference that I have before legislative meetings. Tomorrow, March 5th, the council will have its regular monthly legislative meeting for the month of March, which is also our 21st legislative meeting of council period 25, in case anybody's counting. Um, The meeting will actually be preceded by a committee of the whole meeting where the committee of the whole will mark up um, 4 bills dealing with namings of streets and a bill that clarifies authority regarding floodplain review, permit review. I don't think these are controversial bills at all. And there are a number of confirmations that are coming through the committee of the whole, not marked up by the committee of the whole, to the Water and Sewer Authority Board of Directors and the Convention Center, Washington Convention and Sports Authority Board of Directors, and the reappointment of the People's Council. Actually, those are council confirmations, not appointments. So the committee of the whole will begin, and then we will have the legislative meeting to follow. There are a lot of items that are on the legislative agenda. Most of them are on the consent agenda. Some contracts that relate to migrant services. The non-consent agenda has a number of emergency bills. I'm happy to answer questions on any of those. 2 bills that are on non-consent are Secure DC and the Restaurant Revitalization and Dram Shop Clarification Amendment Act. The Secure DC, which probably has the most interest, public interest, it's not at all surprising that that bill would be a non-consent because the bill is important enough that, of course, there are going to be some amendments from members. Amendments have not circulated yet. And it's possible that Councilmember Pinto will be joining me here and she can answer questions if she does. I do think that we'll be revisiting the DNA provisions, and I'm not exactly sure what the proposal will be, but I think we'll be revisiting that. It's possible there'll be an amendment regarding drug-free zones. But if there's an amendment that would, in essence, repeal it, I don't think that will pass. And I don't know that there will be such an amendment. I do think there will likely be amendment dealing with seniors and penalty enhancements related to them. If I remember correctly, I think the issue there is to be clear in the law that if somebody sort of moves into a house that a senior has and doesn't move out, sort of kind of like takes over, or it might be financial exploitation. I haven't seen the amendments, so I'm not sure. The point being that I think there'll be some amendments, but I think most of the controversial stuff was discussed at first reading. The bill is on the agenda both for final reading as well as an emergency. The emergency is just so that it becomes effective sooner than the 60-day congressional review. And the emergency will conform to the permanent bill. So there won't be anything different there. Other than that, I think the any provisions that are subject to appropriation in the permanent bill will probably be taken out. That's just technical stuff. I'm happy to answer any questions regarding the agenda. I did want to cover a couple of other issues. The council will be meeting again on Tuesday, the 19th. That will be a committee of the whole meeting. I don't know that there'll be a legislative meeting, but the next day will be is the date that we've set for the mayor to present the budget for fiscal year 25. We, of course, have not seen the budget, but it's my understanding that because of the end of the ARPA and ESSER funding, the federal COVID relief funding that came to the district and all of the states, plus the Metro WMATA situation, which, as we know, was roughly a $700 million deficit that the district has committed to putting up $200 million. And the fact that our revenue growth is not as great as it has been in the past, that we're looking at is likely to be a very tight budget. I expect that what the mayor will be proposing will propose a lot of cuts to programs. And I think that this is unavoidable. What exactly will be cut is not clear. The I suspect that new programs are likely to be on the chopping block because they're new, and that there also will be just effort looking at some efficiencies and some, I'm going to say, restructuring of, I mean, the government has just grown a lot. And if the revenue shortfall is as great as we think it might be, excuse me, not revenue shortfall, but the gap between spending and what our revenues now look like, I expect that the budget will have a lot of cuts in it. I also, even though I've not heard this from the mayor, I expect that there probably will be a tax increase that's proposed. I don't know how we are able to get to what I'm guessing is about a 600, $700 million challenge without there being, particularly with the new revenues required, excuse me, the new contribution required to WMATA. I don't see how we get there without there being some sort of a tax increase. So this is still in the speculative stage, but I think this is what we'll be looking at on March 20th is a budget that will have a lot of cuts in it, as well as probably a tax increase. The other issue that I wanted to touch on is that it came to my attention that there's one or two bills that have been scheduled for markup in the House Committee on Government Oversight. This is the committee that's chaired by Congressman Comer. The bills, as far as I know, have not been circulated, but they're marking them up this week. There's not been a hearing on the bills, but they're scheduled for a markup this week. And the one bill that's most concerning to me deals with attempts to deal with criminal justice. And it's a further illustration of how Congress, which has done virtually zero with regard to legislating the district government since 1975. When they step in a very piecemeal way, they cause more damage. So if I remember correctly, the name of the bill is something about immediate safety. There's nothing immediate about it, but one of the provisions is that it would prohibit the district government, that means the mayor and the council, from making any changes to criminal penalties, any changes. So it actually would make some of the provisions in Secure DC ineffective or inoperable, like where we are reinstating the mask provisions that would be prohibited by this bill, where we're changing the law with regard to organized retail theft that would be prohibited by this bill. I mean, it's just nonsense, the way Congress steps in a very superficial way. And I really shouldn't say Congress, because this is just a proposal that presumably will pass the Republican-controlled committee. But, you know, they have no, they've had no experience or responsibility with regard to administering public safety in the district, but they're going to step in with something that just says that the council cannot change any criminal penalties and that it has this effect. We can see how that worked with regard to cannabis, where we have I'm guessing somewhere around a $700 or $800 million black market because we are unable to regulate cannabis. These kinds of sweeping prohibitions that the Congress adopts without hearing, without any consideration, without really looking at the situation, are actually counterproductive and make public safety worse in the district. So we have that to look forward to this week. My understanding, the markup's been scheduled for like Thursday of this week. And there'll be more on that. I'm hoping that I'll get a letter to the House Committee this week to set forth why this is a bad idea. Not that they will listen, but at least we're on record. Happy to take questions on any of the issues tomorrow or that I brought up. Yes, Sam.
Did I hear you correctly when you said you were against any amendment striking the drug-free zone?
I don't support it. I don't think council will strike the, I didn't say any amendment because I haven't seen the amendments. But if there's an effort to strike the drug-free zones from the bill, I don't think that will be successful.
So beyond it being successful, what are your thoughts about the drug-free zone amendment?
As it stands in the bill right now, I'm okay with that. The way it's written, there are a number of protections. A notice requirement, it's limited in duration. Um, The notice requirement includes that the area is posted. Um, There has to be evidence of criminal intent or criminal activity.
And just one last question related to that. At-large Councilmember White and Ward 8 Councilmember White, for that matter, they both, at the council breakfast last month, mentioned that in the sense drugs are already illegal to some extent. And they had, what's your take on
I'm
that?
smiling because, yes, I've heard this. If illegal drugs are illegal, then why do we have drug-free zones to make something illegal illegal? Well, that's just the terminology. We also have gun-free zones, like around schools. It's just a name that's been applied to it. But as you know, the provision has to do with um, giving the police another tool to deal with criminal activity.
So it's not redundant in your eyes?
No, it's not redundant.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, you talked about revisiting DNA collection upon arrest. What about revisiting the sunsetting of pretrial detention?
I am not aware that there's going to be an amendment regarding that tomorrow, so I think that that's going to stay. I do think, I'd heard that there might be an amendment that seeks data with regard to the effectiveness of what we've done with pretrial detention.
And of course, you voted against the amendment last time. Just what's your opinion on the emergency procedure that's been in place since last summer?
I think it's been a necessary step for the council to take. Um, I think it is smart to try to evaluate, to get data and evaluate. I don't know that we need an amendment to get data, but putting that aside, I think it's smart to evaluate the effectiveness of this and see how it's making a difference. It could be making a difference, could be minimal, significant, don't know. I mean, I'm aware that there was an incident last week that was tied to the lack of pretrial release. Is that just one instance, or is that evidence of a larger number of cases? We need to have better information around it. So going back to your original question, I didn't support the amendment to time limit it. I'm also not losing sleep over that because if it's a good thing, we'll continue. Michael.
Yeah, can I ask about the restaurant bill? I heard you mention it briefly.
Can I say no?
Are you expecting amendments, or I know there's some questions about the service charge provision, or there's been some pushback. What's the state of play?
I moved, no, I circulated amendments at first reading. Ultimately, I think I did not move them. I'm looking at bringing those amendments back tomorrow. One of them has to do with just making it clear to restaurants that if they comply with certain requirements, disclosure, public disclosure with regard to service fees, that they are protected from violating the claims of violating the Consumer Protection Act. The other has to do with accelerating the timetable for getting to full minimum wage. And let me be clear when I say that. Tip workers under the law are entitled to the full minimum wage. It's just that it is paid differently than for everyone else. It is a minimum wage that's less plus tips, or the difference between tips and what the full minimum wage would be. I know you know what I mean there. And so, but to get rid of the tip wage and just have one minimum wage right now is scheduled, if I remember correctly, to be achieved in 2027. And what I had proposed last time was moving it up by 2 years. Probably because for reasons I don't understand, a lot of folks believe that somehow this is an effort at trying to repeal the initiative, which I have said over and over again, not only will I not do, but I will not support. That I would do everything I could to prevent it, but I don't think there's anybody on the council interested in repealing the initiative.
And is there any concern about the Historic Preservation Review Board? I'd heard maybe there's a backlog with nominations there. Are you aware of that? That they couldn't reach a quorum potentially.
Yeah, the mayor just sent down nominations last week. And so we are looking, they just came down, so we're looking at scheduling a confirmation hearing and then moving forward. I mean, we can't move faster than the mayor. And this was an issue I raised with the executive last October, concerned that they were down to a quorum. And I guess what you're saying is that they now are below a quorum. Yeah, that's the mayor's doing, but the nominations just came down, so we'll move on them.
Okay, and then you
I
talked.
think we have a full 90 days, and I don't intend to take the full 90 days. But I do think it's important, particularly since 2 or 3 of the nominations are new members, that there is a public hearing and opportunity for the council to hear whether the public has concerns.
Okay. And then you talked about a potential tax increase.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the work of the Tax Revision Commission? You might have been asked about this at your last press conference, but their work is delayed now until the fall. Would the council consider the work they've done in the context of a potential increase, or how do you factor in their work?
I think the council should consider the work that they've done only to the extent that that work would help us understand what the implications are of certain approaches toward taxes. But otherwise, I think that the council should refrain from piecemealing what the commission has looked at. What I'm hopeful is that the commission will put forward a package that will consist of reform. So it won't be about raising new revenue, not that that would be precluded, but it would be about making adjustments to our tax code to try to be more equitable, but also to try to broaden the base. That's always important, to broaden the base, and also to look at simplifying taxes. So just to illustrate what I mean there, you know, your federal income tax, you can do, if you don't have deductions, you can do that easy form, simple, really easy. And that's what good tax policy is that it's easy and simple for people to pay their taxes. We have some taxes like the personal property tax, which individuals don't pay. It's really complicated and it's burdensome. So that's what I mean by improving the administration or simplifying. That's an important goal. I'm spending more time talking about it than I should be because the other components are important as well. Equity, broadening the base, simplifying tax administration. And so the best way to accomplish all that would be through a package. It would make we broaden the base that helps to offset the cost of, let's say, some individual income tax reform for lower middle income folks.
So would those recommendations then be factored in for the FY26 budget?
Would hope so.
Okay.
I would hope so. So again, only with regard to any taxes this year that we look and we see that this particular proposal was a really bad idea, or this other proposal would be better if it was done a certain way. But in my view, we should, any tax increases this year should be limited to funding the existing budget challenges that we have.
What's the state of play on the DNA amendment And why does it deserve to come back? What's the groundswell to bring that back?
I'm going to let Councilmember Pinto speak to that. But I will say this, there's been strong feelings on both sides of the issue. There are folks who feel that it is a violation of civil liberties to be taking somebody's DNA, especially when they haven't been convicted of a crime. And there are others who say that this is really a very effective tool to help prevent crime because you identify through DNA perpetrators. But it would be, that last argument would be even more effective if the government just took DNA from everybody. Well, of course we don't do that. We're a free society. So it's finding that right balance, and there is upset. I would say there's upset from a whole range of people that we went too far, we didn't go far enough.
And maybe this is for Councilmember Pinto, but what's changed to necessitate the change again? If that question makes any sense.
It does. Good morning.
Morning.
So just as a starter, all 50 states and the federal government and the District of Columbia collect and analyze DNA post-conviction, because it is recognized that we need to have this database that's called CODIS, so we can determine if we can hold DNA pieces, the identifying pieces, and prevent repeat incidents. Secure DC initially changed this to be a more aligned with 31 other states, which go a bit farther than that, to say we need to collect DNA at arrest and analyze it, not until charging, for all felony cases and sexual assault misdemeanors. I was extremely disappointed that this provision was amended out. What I can only assume was an inadvertent mistake. What was also amended out was allowing the district to do this testing post-conviction also. I assume that was not intentional. That would put the district completely out of sorts with the rest of the country. So I am moving an amendment today that is a compromise amendment to suggest we should collect and analyze DNA after charging has been made and after a judge has determined that there's probable cause to bring a case, and for a slightly narrower category of cases. So these will be our violent felonies and crimes of violence and our sexual assault misdemeanors. I think it is really important to close cases, to drive down recidivism, to support victims. This is a particularly important women's rights issue. 39% of women in the District of Columbia experience sexual assault at some point in their lives, and women are 14 times more likely to be a victim of rape or sexual assault. And so to not allow the district to ensure that we have all the tools available to prevent repeat offenders when it comes to DNA is irresponsible, and I will be fighting to get that back in. And I hope that my colleagues agree that this is an extremely important tool that we have, and we'll vote for it tomorrow.
Anyone joining you in the amendment to help us count the math?
No, I move the amendment. I'm moving the amendment alone, but I know a number of colleagues will support it. Thanks.
Sam, on this?
Morning, council members. So between the first vote, since the first vote, you've met with community members, and of course, some of them have been very vocal about certain parts of it. Just trying to get an understanding, given what you said about engaging the entire community before the omnibus was compiled, why wasn't that aspect caught initially, or like was that aspect or that viewpoint caught, along certain times? Because these people, Harriet Wilder's Dreams, Black Lives Matter, and certain constituencies, they've always been vocal about the infringement on, their rights. So why weren't these viewpoints caught initially before the compilation of the omnibus bill?
So first, I'd say viewpoints from district residents, which is an important component here. District residents across the district in all 8 wards were solicited and worked with continuously throughout that process, including from what we're proposing today. That is not to suggest that I have 100% agreement with every perspective that is shared. We sought to make compromises. We sought to perfect the language to ensure that it is as comprehensive and going to be fairly applied. There are a number of things that we are moving today also in an ANS, which most of these things will be minor amendments, but things like, an amendment was moved at first reading requiring a study for pretrial detention, but no details were provided as to what that study would look like, what people wanted to see. And so that was something that in speaking with the community, we heard other ideas for, numbers of offenders that were held pretrial that wouldn't have been but for this intervention. We added perspectives to the Sentencing Commission that was responsive to colleagues and what the community was asking for. We're adding additional studies for determining trends of homicide perpetrators, so we can see if there are similarities there. And so this engagement process with the community has been extremely robust. And it certainly does not end today or does not end tomorrow with the passage of Secure DC. The work continues, and there's a lot more that we need to do as a city to prevent crime and to improve accountability and to improve our government coordination. And I look forward to working with voices and perspectives across the city to continue that work.
A quick follow-up. So in terms of engagement, again, these various perspectives, why, in terms of like, what will you do, to ensure that, there is more engagement? What does that look like specifically? I know you've attended community meetings, and I'm just speaking based on people who said that, who've questioned your level of engagement. There's, I wouldn't say speculation, but there's concern that certain constituencies are being given more attention than others. And there are people within the returning citizens community who are saying that their viewpoints aren't really being considered. So in terms of balancing the scale in that regard, what is your strategy as far as really ensuring that all 8 wards and all constituencies are being considered?
Well, I'd say first for our returning citizen community, I have met with a number of different groups, individuals all year long, and many of those perspectives are included in Secure DC. That's why we have improvements to the food at the DC jail. That came directly from folks who had served time there that told me about their concerns with the quality of the food. That's why we're starting a hospitality training program at the DC jail, because returning citizens shared with me their concerns of a lack of optionality for job prospects post coming home. That's why we're not just doing training, but a requirement that DOC connect with employers so that we're not just saying, here's a training, but you're on your own when you come home. And so I value the perspective of our returning citizens. That's why we added also in this bill a requirement that one of the members of the Sentencing Commission has to be a returning citizen. So the perspectives of many returning citizens are embedded throughout Secure DC. No one group is a monolith, of course. In terms of engagement with the broader community, I will continue to always strive to hold myself to the highest standard in this regard. I go to community events in all 8 wards. I host events at all different days of the week, all different times of day, morning, afternoon, late in the evening, weekends. I try to make myself accessible to as many people as I possibly can. Not that there will always be agreement following all of those meetings, but to make sure that my perspectives and what I am championing is informed by residents across the city. And what I know to be true of residents across the city right now is that people are clamoring for us to do more to keep them safe. People are clamoring for action so that everyone can live in a safe community. And that continues to be the most important thing that guides me in my strong belief that we have to move forward with passing Secure DC tomorrow.
I want to add to. So Sam, the way you asked the question, I think was directed at Councilmember Pinto. I'm going to answer it from the perspective of the council. So the beauty of the council being many members as opposed to the executive, which is just one elected official, is that between the 13 of us, we hear from all the different groups and all the different stakeholders. And so there are multiple avenues for different perspectives to present themselves to the council. And then if members agree for that to be presented, I would suggest that some of the amendments that we dealt with at first reading were reflecting those many different perspectives. And between the 13 of us, we continue to hear from perspectives of constituencies across the entire range. On crime?
Yes, please. For Councilmember Pinto, can you tell us if you've heard or what you've heard from your colleagues about other possible amendments, perhaps around mask restrictions and or pretrial detention or any other amendments you're expecting tomorrow?
So some of this, we're gonna have to see where things land this afternoon today. My expectation is there will at least be an amendment around theft. I want to be very clear, this is not only for retail theft. This is a provision in Secure DC that seeks to lower the threshold for felony theft one from $1,000 to $500. I expect that there will be an amendment seeking to re-raise that to $1,000. I don't expect any additional amendments on pretrial detention. And the mask provisions, I've spoken to a number of colleagues over the weekend who had additional questions about the mask provisions, but I do not know yet if it will come in the form of an amendment. We have made a lot of changes over the last several weeks to try to account for a lot of colleagues' concerns and great ideas that they have had. And so I hope that we are almost finalized in the version that we will be voting on tomorrow. And I hope that there will not be too many more amendments.
And if I could just, so that I understand, and I apologize to everybody else who already does understand, that your DNA amendment. So as I understand what you're saying, you would restore what was taken out accidentally, you say, about the ability to collect post-conviction, no matter what happens, right? But the rest of it that you're putting back in, how would that differ from what was originally? And you said there was fewer, you narrowed the scope of who would qualify. Is that the only change?
So there are two key changes. One is the time of collection of the DNA, and the second is the category of cases that would be collected. So the first, in terms of timing, my earlier version allowed for collection at arrest for felonies and sexual assault misdemeanors. Now we're suggesting that collection should be after charging decision has been made and a judge has determined there's probable cause to bring that case. And then the second change is for the category of cases. Instead of all felonies, this will be violent felonies. These are crimes of violence and sexual assault misdemeanors. So I'm hoping that those two changes will get colleagues to where they need to be to support this extremely common sense, evidence-based intervention. Thanks.
And I just want to remind folks that the bill that the House is considering on Thursday would prohibit this legislation.
Just a quick question on that. So how was it accidentally taken out? Are you able to speak? on
Well, I would suggest this is why it is irresponsible in many circumstances to move amendments, especially oral amendments dealing with our criminal code. This bill was not last minute tacked together. This is extremely thorough and thoughtful, and not only in the community engagement perspective, but making sure we're working with all of our agencies so that all these interventions can be implemented as intended. But it does happen sometimes, which is why I'm assuming it was inadvertent, which just the provision that allows DC agencies to do this collection and analysis post-conviction was removed. The federal government would still have the ability to do it as they currently do now. And that's why I assume it was an accidental excise.
And if there are any last minute surprises tomorrow, would you then maybe strike them out?
Well, I don't get to strike things out, but, and I would have phrased it a little differently. I assume it was a drafting error with regard to first reading. I intend to be more deliberate about whether all the i's have been dotted and the t's crossed with amendments tomorrow. So if there's an oral amendment, it'd better be pretty simple, or it had better be have been vetted by our general counsel. Yes, Janae.
I want to ask more about what you're anticipating in the budget. You said $700 to $800 million challenge.
Yeah.
Where are you hearing that from the mayor's side, from your
Just
analysis?
think about it. I mean, one way to look at it is the Metro Challenge, which is roughly 200 million that we committed. There is the reserves that when the ACFR was presented, that the ACFRs were down about 300 million, if I remember correctly. That gets you to 500. In schools, as I recall, there's about $100 million challenge because of the way they've been spending their money.
What was
gets
it
us up
before
to
schools? I'm
600.
sorry, before we, what was it? The 300
I'd
million?
mentioned when the ACFR was presented, that the reserves, to replenish the reserves completely. I mean, this is just a back of the envelope calculation, but I stand by where I am on this, which is that there's a challenge of, I'm going to say, between 600 and $800 million.
In terms of tax increases, what could that be in the range of? What sales tax, what other, what could
I
you?
have no idea.
If you were mayor, what would you look at? If you were mayor to?
Well, if I was mayor, we wouldn't be in this problem. No. The,
You took over to.
it's really, I have, I believe that there's going to be a tax increase, but beyond that, I can't speculate what it would be. If it was sales tax, there would be a lot of folks who would point out that sales tax is regressive. Although I do think that a regional sales tax is the best way to go to fund Metro on a permanent basis, because that is of interjurisdictional complexities. That's the best approach. If it's a real property, I can tell you from experience that property owners get really, really upset. So not only would there be an increase in the rate, but they're already paying more because assessed values go up. If it's income tax, the challenge there is that we have the most progressive income tax right now. Our personal income tax is higher than any of the other jurisdictions. We don't want to encourage people to leave the district, especially higher earners. So each different tax has its own reasons for not doing it. So it's very hard to speculate what it would be. When the council adopted most of the recommendations of the Tax Revision Commission in 2013, my recollection was that the cost of that was about $168 million. I don't know why I remember it being that number, but just as an order of magnitude, if you remember back to then, maybe you don't, but I remember the Washington Post wrote an editorial about how outrageous this was. I mean, just 168 million was dramatic, or no, there was a lot of drama around it. And so I don't think that anything much above that would be feasible, and even that will be difficult.
Where could we see cuts possibly?
Name it,
On what?
name it. The only thing that
What-
we know
I'm asking
for
you.
sure is that the funding formula for public education has gone up 12%. Other than that, I
Okay.
think everything is vulnerable.
Hello, you obviously read the Post story that, and Trayon White voted present. Have you had any conversation, and Councilmember Pinto, to bring him on board to make it a unanimous vote?
I have a call into him, but I have not talked to him.
And secondly,
Yes, and I have worked with Councilor Trayon White throughout this process. He has been ringing the alarms for years about the emergency, particularly of gun violence that we're experiencing, that we have been experiencing in Ward 8 and that we're experiencing in the city. He has been a good partner in this effort. I hope that he will support Secure DC tomorrow, but our conversations have been continuing.
and secondly, again, for both of you, there's been some national publicity about the recall. The New York Times did a big story. Do you have any thoughts about how that might affect the vote tomorrow, or anything? Any thoughts?
Well, you're
about that?
referring to the fact that there've been recall initiatives with regard to 2 council members.
Yes.
I expect both council members will be present and voting tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yes.
In January, this is a kind of off topic, but in January, you said that you oppose public money to be used to build a new Commanders Stadium. Do you
Correct.
still feel that way?
Correct.
And if so, who do you think should fund this new stadium?
The NFL, the team owners. I'll note the football is what, 9 home games a year? And although that kind of reminds me, maybe I won't go there. 9 games a year. Baseball, which, you know, was controversial, I think went through the council on a 7-6 vote, is 80 games a year? So there's a very different economic impact. You're going to.
You can say no. Do you believe the 500 million that you and the owner of the Wizards and Capitals discussed to keep the team here should still be on the table now, given?
Absolutely. I
Why?
believe absolutely it should be on the table. Well, in terms of economic impact, 200 or so events, I think it's more than 200, is a significant economic impact. It's an existing use that has been very popular. I'm trying to remember, I think it roughly correlates to the revenue that we bring in just in tax revenue from that site. We made a commitment that we wanted the teams to stay, the Capitals and the Wizards. And so absolutely, I think that should stay. I also think we have a better proposal than Virginia. So maybe they'll realize that. And so we need to keep the offer on the table.
The mayor has discussed publicly her option of taking the team to court to enforce the lease, is her words, that they currently have through the 2 10-year extensions. Have you been part of those conversations? Have you looked at the lease that the council passed legislation afterward that seems to give some wiggle room as to whether or not they can actually get out of it early or not? And I'm just wondering if you've taken a dive into that, what you think the legality of that is, whether they actually can get out of this lease in 2027, and whether or when the district should take them to court over that.
I have some awareness and understanding, and my view is that it's unnecessary to discuss that at this time. I'm glad you do. I just think it's unnecessary to discuss this at the time. I mean, my answer to your question.
When
was
is the time? If
we
the
have a
General
five-
Assembly passes, if the
we have a
General
five-
Assembly approves?
We have a $500 million offer that we made in December, and it's on the table. And my view is it should stay on the table. It should stay on the table through this budget. And we'll see how events play out.
Switching gears, and I apologize again if you've talked about this.
Now, you've been here
there's
the
move-
whole time. So you've
I know,
heard
there's
that.
move on the Hill to name a road in front of the Russian embassy. Do you have plans for that as well? Is that moving? Is that part of? Is that,
I'm moving emergency legislation tomorrow that would have the same effect.
they keep saying a road in front of it. Do you know the exact road? And would it be a ceremonial renaming, or would you actually rename the road so their mail would have to go to that address?
Give me a second here. It would be the public alley system around the embassy.
Alley.
Yes.
What good
That's
does the
the,
alley do? Let me channel my inner Mark Plotkin. I mean, if you're trying to make seriously, if you're trying to make a point,
Can I
if you're-
sigh when you say that?
well, if you're trying to make a point and you rename the alley around the building and not where the mail would have to go, so that they would actually have to write it on their correspondence and read it every day when they open up their mailbox, what effect does that take?
Now, Mark, you've been around a long time. You should know by now that the street in front of the embassy has already been named after
True.
Sakharov. I can't remember his first name. Anton
Well, that is
Sakharov.
the MB, I thought is that the same as I thought it was the ambassador's residence. That maybe that's what the Congress is looking at, the ambassador's
16th Street.
residence.
The property on
same?
16th Street, yes.
Okay.
So we'll have public rights of way in front and behind, and on the side named after dissidents.
Was the first one ceremonial or the actual
It
renaming?
was done by Congress and it was done rather poorly. They don't know how to write local legislation, which is another reason why they ought to keep their hands off of DC laws. because I don't know how to write legislation. We do know how to write legislation. This is a DC public right of way. I recognize it's an alley, but that's what the proposal is. The reason why I'm putting it forward tomorrow is because I think it's important that the Council of the District of Columbia, not the Congress of the United States, name our streets and alleys. So that's why.
Chairman Comer, to tell him that, how many times have you met with him in person to discuss these concerns that you've?
I've only been able to get one meeting with him in the past year and a half
Your choice or his?
by his. Boy, that created some excitement. Were you done? Getting a little exciting here. Yes.
As it relates to last week's hearing with OSSI, what are your thoughts about the bus delays that are affecting special needs students? I've been speaking with parents. It's affecting them academically. It's been going on for more than a year now. Are you satisfied with Superintendent Grant's
The
testimony?
number of complaints we got at the hearing or right before the hearing compared to a year ago is significantly less. Can't emphasize that enough, significantly less. And it reinforces what the superintendent is saying, which is that their on-time rate has gotten much, 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 much better. It's still a problem that there are some instances where the buses are late and kids are, as a result, disadvantaged in getting to school or getting home on time. I thought the hearing was good to keep pressure on OSSI to do better. And in conversations I've had with the superintendent, have pressed her to do better. One element that is missing is there ought to be a better, I'm going to call it a tracking system, so that parents know when and where the bus is. And that hasn't been implemented yet, and that needs to be implemented.
So as far as implementing that, what are you committed to doing, as far as the budget to facilitate that?
Well, we'll see what the budget says. I'm hopeful that this is not an area that's cut, because this is a service that directly relates to the district's obligation under the federal Individuals with Disabilities Act. So we have an obligation there. We'll see what the budget says. If the budget cuts it, then I will work to restore it. I don't think the budget will cut it, but I will press that they OSSI continue to improve. The operations have gotten much better than they were a year ago. I mean, just think back to January, I think it was January 9th of 2023, when it was the phones were ringing off the hook, and they're not doing that now.
One question for the time being. This concerns requests or demands rather for a resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. We saw last week protesters interrupted a hearing.
Yes.
What's your take on that? Is there going to be any action on that anytime soon?
I don't think there will be action anytime soon. Now, I did tell Reverend Hagler that I would meet with him, and we're trying to get a meeting scheduled this week.
As far as the changing of the colors outside the Wilson building
Oh, that was
around October
months
7th.
ago.
Exactly. So to that point, and I'm asking this, given it is months ago, but why the move to do that initially when, just given the long history of the conflict in that region and just, talks about a two-state solution or whatever the case is, why the sudden move, or what some would consider the sudden move to light the Wilson building that particular color? Why
Well,
not just stay out of
I
it?
would ask you to put yourself back in time to October 7th or October 8th. There wasn't anybody who thought that the invasion of Israel was appropriate, and there was widespread sentiment of supporting Israel. It was in that context that we did the lights, but the lights changed, I'm going to say, a month later. So I view that as old news.
Back?
From you? Am I giving you permission to push back?
Well, not
No,
permission,
you're
I
going
wouldn't
to
have
anyway.
permission, but I'm just going to ask for a quick follow-up. Again, with Palestinian constituents in the city and looking at October 7th in a broader context, we're talking about decades of occupation,
Yeah.
starting from the Balfour Declaration and all of that. So even with the sentiments in support of Israel and with the council not wanting to pass a resolution or introduce one at the very least, why step in initially in support of one side?
I just gave you an answer on that. My answer is not going to change. The
Did,
sentiment
but-
on October 7th, October 8th was very strong, I would say, across the country. But, you know, the fact of the matter is as problematic as it is, this is a national or international issue, not an issue before the Council of the District of Columbia.
You light it if that's the case.
I've given you my answer.
Excuse me. So I don't know if you heard, but Montgomery County is looking to rework its agreement with ICE, the immigration authorities, in
Yeah.
light of some violent crimes where undocumented migrants have been named as suspects. I bring that up because the man charged with shooting 3 MPD officers last month and setting off that barricade, ICE says he was in the country illegally from Jamaica. So I was wondering if the city would be open to reworking its own agreement with ICE to work with them in finding violent suspects.
I'm not familiar with what the practice or law has been in Montgomery County or how it's changing. In the district, my recollection is that we do not report individuals to ICE if the only issue is that they've been arrested. And my recollection is that part of the consideration, which I think I heard acknowledged in the news about Montgomery County, is that we do not want to have the counterproductive effect of increasing crime in I won't going to say marginalized communities, maybe that's not the correct way to put it, in communities where there are immigrants who are afraid that if they were to report criminal activity like domestic violence or other form of activity, that if they report it, that then they risk being picked up by ICE, whether or not they're illegal. And so we want people to report, we want people to cooperate with the police. And if my recollection is correct, there is cooperation with ICE at the point that folks are convicted.
Do those concerns you just named outweigh potential concerns of a violent suspect being arrested and them being in the country illegally?
Well, what about a violent suspect who is not reported because the victim is afraid of ICE? Rightly or wrongly, because we do know ICE makes mistakes and they pick up folks who are in the country legally. But if people are afraid to report crime to the police, then in that way, we are incentivizing violent criminals. So I don't know I don't know the details from last week. You know, whether that was somebody who'd been previously involved and could have been reported, I don't know.
I guess just one more follow-up, but the head of Baltimore's ISIS field office, Darius Reeves, said this is not to go after the mom who might be shoplifting or anything to get by. It's specifically targeted in a very narrow scope of people. And that's what Mark Elrich was agreeing to as well. Would you be open to that?
You're making me have to remember when I chaired our Judiciary Committee, and I remember, my recollection is that there were a lot of promises about not sweeping up innocent people, and yet they get swept up anyway. So I do think, somebody who has been convicted, if they're here illegally, ICE should have full authority to do whatever they can do. But I don't believe that we should, in the name of public safety, discourage people from working with the police. Yes, Mark.
At the risk of being branded a nitpicker, which is, I think, something you can relate to, I'm wondering your thoughts on the scheduling of hearings. And anecdotally, some of the hearings, particularly legislative sessions and committee holes, have been starting late. Sometimes more than an hour, way more than an hour late.
I know this bugs you.
Well, sir, it doesn't just
I
bug me.
understand.
Let me,
I
if I may.
understand.
You have staff members, you have press, you have community people, you have stakeholders many of times, particularly at the legislative sessions and committee of the whole, who are waiting for hours outside in the hallway to get in, waiting at home to watch it on TV. And I get the process. I get that you're not just sitting back, making them wait because you want to make them wait, but there's no communication whatsoever, whether it's on DC cable, all you see on the screen once the thing is supposed to start is it will start shortly, even though it could be hours away from starting. When you take the day, when people are waiting in the hallway, there's no communication to sometimes the hundreds of people who are in the building waiting for these hearings to begin. And then when you take the dais, sir, you make no comment, at least at the last legislative session, you make no acknowledgement, let alone an apology or explanation of why you're starting so late. And I'm just wondering if there's a fix to that, if there's a way to, again, not keep us waiting as long, perhaps starting the breakfast meetings earlier, ending them sooner. I mean, you're conducting business. I get it that it's open to the public, the few of us who choose to come, but it's not broadcast on TV. And I've beaten the horse now. So, what say you?
So how do I answer that? First of all, could we communicate better? Yes. And I will talk to the council secretary about that. Second, I will say it could be difficult to communicate clearly as to what the delayed start time is. I'm thinking back to the last breakfast or the breakfast before that. It might have been the one in December with the Attorney General, not the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney. I say to members, it's 11:15. We have a meeting at 11. Members keep talking. I don't mean talking like talk, but the pre-meeting is very important to ensuring that the council meeting moves as smoothly as it can. You don't want to see it not move smoothly, because what that looks like is bickering and delays and it's worse than looking at sausage. When amendments come in and they're by surprise and folks haven't talked things out, there's a real value to that pre-meeting. And the pre-meeting.
You had that meeting for the last one, and you hear Councilmember Pinto now has to go and clean up, in her words, what happened in the irresponsible.
But Mark, let me remind you, because you've been around a while.
Saying that.
Before I became, because very soon you'll be the dean of the press corps, DC press corps. You'll remember that the meetings used to go on for 8 hours, 10 hours. Meetings would start at 10 o'clock and end at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and be often very disorganized. I'm not interested in that. I want things worked out. So yes, there were some problems, and actually you missed the last administrative meeting. I'm glad you did, where I chewed out council members because of what I consider to be a fair amount of disorganization before the meeting. The point here is that the pre-meeting is important. The pre-meeting sometimes takes longer than is expected. It could be difficult for the secretary to know with precision what time that pre-meeting is going to end. Nonetheless, we could do better and communicate more. But I will say this as well. I strongly believe that this is the order of business for the council, that our meetings are open to the public, but that our meetings are about our getting the legislative work done. So I get that, for instance, in a meeting, we might recess suddenly to try to work something out. And you're sitting in the audience, you don't know what's going on, you don't know how long it's going to last. But the most important thing that we're doing is we are legislating. So that comes first. Second, it's open to the public. And third, to the extent that we can make it convenient, we should.
How about broadcasting that pre-meeting? It is?
The live stream. I
It is? Okay, thank you. Okay,
You need to work with Lindsay more.
very helpful.
More helpful than me, probably. Any other questions from folks? Mr. Rice?
Yes. Do you have any thoughts about what might come next in terms of crime suppression, crime control after the
I'm
bill?
glad you brought that up, because it reminds me,
I have another.
there's a lot of attention to this legislation, but I've said over and over again that the greatest deterrent to crime is arresting people. It's not about passing a law, it's arresting people. And the second greatest deterrent to crime is prosecuting the people who are arrested. if you can commit a crime and you're not arrested, then there's no deterrent effect. So that's what's most important, and that gets lost sight of when we talk about this legislation. So what the council's doing is important. We're making some improvements to the law. I don't want to take away from that, but I want to, in response to your question about what's next, is I want to reprioritize that the police have got to increase the case closure rate. That's not to blame them. There are things that we should be looking at, whether it's more resources or more training or more interagency cooperation, I don't know. But increase the case closure rate, and then the U.S. Attorney increasing the prosecution rate. If you look at the statistics, the arrest per police officer is way down. The number of arrests as a percentage of a particular crime is down, and the number of prosecutions is down over the last decade. And those make a big difference.
Secondly, in presidential politics, the DC Republican Party had its primary over the weekend, and
They wouldn't let me vote.
no, you have to be a Republican. But the district has the distinction now of being the only jurisdiction to vote for Nikki Haley. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Great. I think that's going to conclude this. Thank you all. See you tomorrow at 11 o'clock.